So this will sure uh, I kind of put this topic as root of the nations because it's very apt. When we're studying Parashat Noach, we understand how the complexity of the nations come into play. Now, in many various teachings and platforms, I have spelled out, I've given many people the framework of how God has dealt with the nations, how God has separated the nations, how God has separated his people for a role and a purpose in this world. But today we want to look at the root, the essence of how the nations have progressively developed on this earth and where they stand in the sight of God, where they stand in in the standing before the Father. Uh, Parashat Noach, we all know, is a parasha that starts with Noah finding grace in the sight of God. And he instructs Noah to go and to build an ark and to save as many people he can. But finally, who does he save? He saves the animals and he saves 8 people, including him, into the ark. And from those 8 people now, we are billions and billions of people on this earth. But why did God do that? So then the entire episode of the floods, the waters, and the ark, and everything was destroyed. And then they come out, and life starts all over again. And God blesses the earth and says, "No more will I destroy it with water." And the blessings that He gives and the covenant He cuts with Noah, and so forth and so forth. And then we realize that humanity again has lost its way, even after that complete judgment that God had given over the entire world and that rectification that God tried, but humanity still lost its way. So that's the basic storyline. But there is something else that's happening in the background, and I want to you all to understand. Parashat Noah talks about the corruption of man. How was man corrupted? We all know, we've all read, we've all studied the Bible. So yes, man was corrupted and man became bad and it became evil and they were killing each other and they were doing all sorts of things and God got fed up and God said, I want to destroy man and all that stuff. No, I mean that's fine on a Pashat level. It's fine, but let's look at the root of what the Bible is talking to us about corruption. Completely, that root is very essential to understand. So please turn with me to Parashat Noach and we're going to read something very interesting in Parashat Noach in Perek Tet, that's Perek 9, chapter 9, right? Let me get this here. It says, Ve'barach Elohim et Noach ve'et benav vayomer lachem peru u'urvu u'malehu et haaretz. Vayi Barak, and the Lord blessed Noach and his sons, and he said to them, Puru ve'urvu, be fruitful, peri, fruit, puru ve'urvu, and multiply, and fill the land. Fill the land. And God said, the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens and everything that moves on the earth and the fish of the sea. In your hand they are given. Verse 3. Every moving thing that lives shall be yours for food. Like the herbal greenery, I have given you everything. But flesh with its soul, its blood, you shall not eat. But your blood of your souls I will demand Of every beast I will demand it. Now, this should catch your eye immediately out here. What is God saying out here? So, pre flood, God had never instructed Adam and Eve and his descendants to partake of flesh. They were frugivorous humanity, supposed to be have been living on this earth. They were supposed to eat fruits and vegetation and crops and whatever they could lay their hands on. That's what man was created for. But since man lost its way, humanity lost its way, and they started, impurity started infiltrating the soul of a human being. They started warring, fighting, killing each other, killing animals. The animals became impure. They started killing each other and devouring each other. Humans started eating animals, and all this started. God seeing this, He said, "This is too much. I need to do something about it." Therefore, He destroyed that world with a sense of judgment. And that's the difference between pre flood and post flood. So, pre flood, Elohim is still looking at his creation with a very strict hand because he founded everything and he created everything with perfection and justice. It was immediate. So God said, no, 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 no. This cannot be. Therefore, he brought in the flood. It dissolved that entire thing. But after the flood, we see the tone of God change. He says, no more will I destroy anything on this earth. As long as the sun and the moon and the stars and seasons and harvest time and thing, life will go on. So the compassionate and the kind side of God came out here. If you're talking about grace, this is it, my friends. Grace is not New Testament. Okay. But then he says something very interesting. He says, but flesh with its soul, its blood you shall eat. You shall not eat. But your blood of your souls I will demand. Damu lo techalu ve'ach et damachem nafshotchem idrosh meyad chol chaya idroshenu umeyad ha'adam meyad ish akiv idrosh et nefesh ha'adam. Listen to this. But your blood of your souls I will demand. I will take a reckoning for it. I will take a reckoning with it. I will scrutinize it. I will audit it. Whatever you do, I will audit it. And if you shed blood, that it will have a penalty. It has to have a penalty. Because now, at the end of the day, the sense of pure and perfect judgment always gets invoked in the Father. No matter how kind and compassionate, is very, very, very equitous in his nature. Is very simple to understand that where judgment needs to be given, God is all in for it. So he says, y'all have been killing and eating flesh and doing all this stuff. I'm not going to stop you all now. But if you all go to the extent of killing each other, then I'm going to hold you all responsible. But look at this phrase. He says, but your blood of your souls I will demand, I will reckon it. Of every beast will I demand it. Now it's very interesting that God is putting the Adam, the man, on level with a beast. Is everyone there? Are you all able to hear me?
Yes, Moran.
Okay. Some of you are frozen, so I was just wondering. Okay, he's putting man at the level of a beast. He says, human to human, I will reckon your blood, and for the beast also. That means now, if you look at this very carefully, God is considering man at the level of a nefesh behema, at a very basic level, a bestial level. He's saying, because this is what the sin has done. Man has fallen from his lofty spiritual heights, and now his nefesh behema, the animal soul within him, has been strengthened and it has moved away from the consciousness of God. And the nefesh behema now is behaving with its true animalistic behavior. It's not in control. So God is saying, if I have to have judgment on you, I will have to destroy you all over again. So I am not going to do that. You will behave like an animal now. Therefore, the nations, the world, in the sight of God, are animalistic in its outlook. Being an animal, the nations, the goy, the nations, and in the sight of God, in the standing of God. Now, it's very interesting. Why is this interesting? Because we've seen that the level of man had fallen to the level of the beast in the field. And truly, this is what even Paul says in the book of, and sorry, in the New Testament, he says, you know, don't behave like brutish beasts, fighting, striving, greed, all the negative midot that people behave like animals. You throw a bone or a piece of flesh to between a pack of dogs, and you see how they fight for that. That humans tend to do the same thing. You throw in a couple of crores and you'll crores of money out there, and you'll find people all running to fight over it. Property. You see. The animalistic nature comes out in the human because they're living in the flesh. We're completely living in the flesh, friends. So therefore, we have to scrutinize our way. We have to look at ourselves and say, am I professing to be walking in my neshama, or am I living in the nefesh? Am I living in the flesh? Is the flesh overpowering me? When I look at an opportunity and I'm being competitive about it, that's going to bring out the animal inside of me. How how am I supposed to live in this world? This is the starting point for the going for the nations. So God let the nations, he said, go. I am not going to stop you now. Go. Settling the nations. He divided the nations into 70 and he said, well, go. Your tribe, your people, your country, your language, go. Okay. In Genesis 6, verse 3, let's look at 6, verse 3. There is 6. Okay, what's it? Ah, this is towards the end of Parashat Bereshit. 6, verse 3, God says, Vayomer Adonai lo yadon ruachi be'adam leolam. Bashagam hu basar vehayu yamiv mea ve'asarim shana. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not be agitated, will not contend evermore concerning man because he is flesh. What does this mean? What does this mean? It means that man now has gone into this beast mode, animal mode, and he's fallen to the level where the, the animal is talking inside of him now. The animal is talking inside of him. And by the animal talking inside of him, he cares less about the presence of God in his life, about coming before God's presence and worshiping and building a relationship, building a bond, and for the neshama, the breath of God's spirit to come and to revive him and to get him back to the old ways. He cares less about it. The spiritual rebirth now is become so critical in humanity that God has said, you know, man is flesh and he's living in the flesh. Therefore, my spirit will no more be agitated with him, and uses the word yadon. Yadon comes the word yadim. Rather, he says, if I have to continue being agitated with every human being, I will have to bring judgment on them. Therefore, it's better that I restrain my presence from humanity and go back up, retrieve myself, contract myself to a place and let humanity live. And then, because of this, God put in many audit points and many things in place so that humanity now life has been audited and serviced with God being at a distant. Okay, please understand this. Very important. So, because of this, now, because of this, God made his decision that he needs to separate himself from everything he's created because it's not working according to its to to what he had intended to. In verse same chapter, chapter 6, verse 5, the Lord it says, Vaira Adonai ki Rabba Ra'a. Vaira, and the Lord, for he saw the greatness of the evil, Ha'adam be'aretz ve'chol yodzar, makshevot libi rak ra kol hayom. These words should catch you immediately now. And the Lord saw the great evil and the wickedness of Adam, of man, be'eretz, in the earth, in the land, ve'chol yodzar. And the word yodzar comes from the word yadzira. So I don't know whether I have done the, maybe I've spoken to you all about yadzira, about formation. Yadzira is basically formation, right? Beria is creation, Yadzira is formation. So Beria is to create, Yadzira is to form. Yodzer makshevot. Makshevot is the word used to compute. If you go to Israel today and you ask for a computer, so they'll ask you, you want a makshavat, you want a computer, something with computes, right? That's the word. So God is saying that man now, the essence of man, from a bestiality point of view, is computing, he's putting algorithms of evil and wickedness, generating that constantly day in and day out. Verse 5, chapter 6 of Genesis. And every product of the thought of his heart was evil always. Now listen to this. We normally say thoughts come from our brains, right? The thought comes from your heart. Your brain is processing, it's computing that thought. And then it says, and the Lord, it says, he uses the word Vainachem from the word Noach. What is Noach? Grace, kindness. grace. Why Nachem? It also can mean to console. Nakamu means, show compassion and consoling to oneself. It could mean that also in a very different way. Why Nachem Adonai ki asa, and the Lord consoled himself. That means he acquiesced his nature by saying, this is what has happened. Humanity has gone bad. I'm going to close this chapter on it. That's it. And then he said, you know, why did I ever do this and make man on this earth? Why did I ever do it? But anyhow, since he is the ultimate, he is the ultimate of decision of the highest level of divine will and providence. He takes his divine will to change reality and says, okay, that's it. I've changed my mind now, and let's put a plan in place. Let's put a plan forward. And he was pained in his heart. He was pained in his heart because of this. Now, when it uses the word yatzar, that every thought that was being formed inside man, and then it says that Adonai ki asa et hadam, and having made man, okay, the word made man. So we're talking about different levels of emanation from the eternal Father. The first level is the level of emanation, that's Azilut, that is pre thought, pre divine will, pre everything known to the human mind. You see, it takes a split second for a thought to enter your heart. But just before it enters your heart, that is Atzilut. Suddenly, you get a thought in your heart. Now, your heart is sending that thought that has no form, it has no body, to your brain that's now makshevot, computing, as the Bible is saying. It's computing and putting together words, actions, bad words, good words, nice words, pleasant words, comforting words, words of love, words of hatred, whatever words you want to call it. It's putting all this together. It's computing and it's forming a reality in your brain. And then you create a reality with yourself. I've seen this n amount of times, numerous amount of times. People have created their own reality. And I'm like, hello? You know why? Because we have to learn to understand whether I am allowing God's divine will inside of me, or am allowing the evil intent to overtake me from inside. I have to be very careful of this, extremely careful. Anyway, so this thing now is the root cause, is the root for humanity to evil. So God saw, he saw how evil the human is, not because the man is evil, but he was computing, he was forming, he was allowing impurities to reach his brains and forming evil thoughts in his heart and bringing it out into action, therefore killing, fighting, abusing, greed, lust, everything came out because man was allowing corruption of this entire process inside of him. What is this process all about? The process of allowing divine will in your heart, elevating it to your brain computing it. When your brain computes something, it drops down to your mouth is speaking it. Once your mouth speaks it, then your hands go on to do it. This entire process is the same process that is the image of God. If you want to know what the image of God is, it's this. Because God, in his eternal wisdom, thought a thought in his heart. He elevated it to his divine wisdom and understanding and knowledge, the high supernal wisdom that we cannot fathom. He put together a language, words, or whatever you want to call it, and then he spoke creation out. That's chapter 1 of Genesis. Then chapter 2 it says, and God, Lord God, formed, Yadzer, formed man from the dust of the ground. And he formed everything. And he formed everything. And the grass sprouted and this sprouted. Chapter 1 was about Beria. Chapter 2 is about Yetzirah, forming. So this entire process now, besides looking at the story of Noah, that man had become corrupt and evil, and God told Noah to build the ark and to save the animals and humanity on the ark, and God saved them, and Noah became a righteous person, and God saved Noah saved the world, and then that is a wonderful Sunday school story, my friends. The root of it is that man had become corrupted in the image of God. What I'm trying to tell you is man became corrupted in the image of God. And when man became corrupted in the image of God, God could not stand it anymore. He said, this is not who I am, and this is not what I expect of humanity that I've created, because I created him in my image. Therefore, he says in 6:3, my spirit will no more be agitated with humanity. I'm going to separate myself from them. That's it. That's it. So if you're looking for rectification in anything in this world, the essence of rectification for anything in this world is to rectify the image of God that you are created in. This is the root of the nations. Therefore, after this, after this, after the story of the flood, okay, when Noah comes out and he builds an altar and he offers the sacrifices on the altar, and God gives him a covenant, okay, and then God tells him what we read, okay, and he makes a covenant with him, and then was chapter 10 talks about the descendants of Shem and Ham and how they spread out all over the world, and they spread out into the 70 nations of this world, basically, slowly, not so far. And then we come to chapter 11, which now it's telling us the intensity of how humanity basically was misusing the image of God that we were created in. So chapter 11 now starts with the whole earth. Vayehi chol haaretz shefa echat. Listen carefully. Now you should be getting this. The whole earth was of one speech, shafa. And being of one speech now, they were misusing the creative power of words and speech, and misusing the image that God had created them in. Because of now, the likeness of God also, midot of kindness, love, mercy, and the personality of God also was going down the drain because humanity was corrupting the image that God had made in it. Therefore, chapter 11 starts with the whole earth was of one shafa, because now the speech is the central thing that tells me what my mind is thinking and what my heart is entertaining, whether it's corrupt or it's not corrupt. So what words I speak now is essential to know the kind of person that I am. The whole earth was full of one language and unified in words. That means they all came into covenant with each other. One guy was thinking bad and saying bad things. The other guy also was thinking bad and saying bad things. They say, okay, yeah, we are unified. Let's be together and let's do something, join hands. And it came to pass in the migrating from the east. So now they left off. It was the word Mikhedim. Okay, they traveled Mikhedim. They left off the old ways. One of the words when you look at Mikhedim is it means you leave off who you are, where you come from. You reject. It's like saying, I don't want to stay with my parents anymore. I don't want to stay at home. You know why? Because my mom and my dad are too religious, man. I just can't take it. I can't stand it anymore. Just they're too religious. That is leaving. Mikhedim. And they traveled. They said, you know, we don't deserve dying again in the flood. We don't want to be judged. We need to protect ourselves. We need to become big. We need to become great. We need to stand against this God who thinks he owns everything. And who is he to just destroy us whenever he feels like? Who is he to judge us? So they move away in rebellion and they walk away from who they are. And they find this place called Shinar and they settle there. And then they said, let us make bricks and let us build for ourselves. Let us build a city. Let's build us a name. See, and then they said, come, let us build us a city. Let us make us, uh, uh, okay, and let us build us a tower out there with its top in the heavens. Why? Because they said, if ever anything happens again, at least we'll be able to stand against God and protect ourselves. Come on, guys, this is incredible. And I see humanity the same today. Same. Who's God? God? Really? I don't know. I mean, protect yourself, man. You have just yourself. This is where we are. We're rebelling. We still have the same attitude in life. This is the root of the nations. You know what the root of the nations is? Is corrupting the image of God that we are created in. Therefore, God separated the world and said, you go your own way, and he created 70 nations. And now, because of which 70 nations are created, and then God comes down and he looks at what they're doing at the Tower of Babel and says, one second, that one speech that you all are talking about, you all are misusing that. You all are destroying reality with the speech. Now, I want you to think for one second. What do you think, and how do you think they were misusing speech? Because the speech, they were indulging in creative aspects of chanting and speech, which has power as just as good as witchcraft. They were on a very high level of using speech energy, much like what you have in transcendental meditation and new age philosophies, that is power and in this energy around you and all that nonsense. And you find a lot of these people who do this meditation, indulge in all that is witchcraft. It's witchcraft on the side of God, and you're misusing the image that God is creating. So they were taking the powers for themselves, and they were manipulating these powers, and they were doing a lot of things, and God took cognizance of it. He said, this is not what is intended. This is not what we're supposed to do. And by the way, in chapter 11, when all this is happening, and God came down, and what did God do? God sent fire to destroy them. God sent a flood to destroy them. Did God send some armies from somewhere with horses to destroy them and disperse them? No. Did God send a plague, disease? No. What did God do? He changed their languages, confused their language. That means that one shafar, which they were using to create, to alter reality by way of witchcraft and way of uh, interfering with the DNA of creation by way of speech. Now God said, I'm going to put a stop to it because the power of speech that is given to humanity is in the image of God, my friends. It's in the image of God. It all following. Very, very important to understand this. So these were the nations. They were sent out. They were sent out. And now in we are we are at this place where we realize that the nations now have been separated and God has to put a plan in place. He has to put a plan in place. Therefore, chapter 11 still continues with the Tower of Babel and the generations of Noach. And chapter 12, we introduced to Avraham, Parashat Lech Lecha. So I've done this before with everybody. As the world was moving in one direction, Avraham was called out to move in a other direction, the opposite direction from the world. Are you all following me? So he told the nations, I give you your countries, I give you your boundaries, I give you your languages, I give you your place to live in. Go and be happy. And when the day of reckoning and the regeneration of all things come, I will call you out wherever you are, whichever country you're in, nation, tribe, tongue, whatever you are in. I will gather you at an appointed time later on once I put my plan into place for the restitution of all things. So, just as God gave the nations the inheritance, God said, one second, I want inheritance for myself, for me, because for me, from this inheritance that I generate now, I will slowly rectify all those other nations. I will rectify all those other nations because they need to be rectified. They need to be collected. They need to be brought in. The souls need to be brought in. So Parsha Noah is so foundational to understand what the nation's all about. Very, 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 very interesting to understand. Uh, in Genesis chapter 7, let's go to chapter 7. And I think it was 21. I'm just opening the Torah, friends. Okay, verse 21. Mm. Yeah, verse 21. It says, "Vayarak Adonai et Reiach Hanakiach Vayomer Adonai el Libi lo osif et haadam beavu hadam ra neura velo laha hot et chol chai kasher asiti. So Noah gave this offering, but look at this now. I will not continue to curse again the ground because of man, since the design of his heart is evil, not from his birth, it says from his youth. This is why in among the Jewish people, they understand that a child is unaccountable and innocent till the time he reaches the age of 13. It's only at the time of 13 when he starts developing the I inside of him that the child needs to be disciplined and taught to not entertain the Yetzer Hara. Because everything that a child experiences in this life is going to affect the child how he responds to situations, to words, to people, to behavior, to touch, and environment. The parents, Horeha, the parents have to teach the child not about education of becoming the encyclopedia. They have to teach the child to understand the image of God and to understand son, daughter, this is how you need to function as a human being. If you learn to function and you discern between the good and the bad, between the hara and the hatov, between the evil inclination, good inclination, your work is half done. Because it's only in the youth now, the youth start multiplying and computing evil on this earth. So they build up a reality. That reality builds up a personality. That personality builds up an environment they function in. That environment brings sin, misery, bad relationships, fights, and everything now comes into play, friends. It is tremendous. It is tremendous. Where are we? 7. Okay. 7. So we're looking at, wait one second. 7:21.
8:21.
And all flesh.
More 8th chapter.
I read 8:21 just now, right?
Yes, More.
I read 8:21. Now I'm reading 7:21. I'm reading 7:21. So it says that the waters rose 15 amos above the mountains, and all flesh that moves upon the earth expired. All flesh expired. Okay, to verse 21. Ve vayigava. The word vayigava, whole basar. Vayigava is another word that's very closely related to mut, meth, death. There's a difference between expire and death. To die and to expire. You meth, something is something which is it's lifeless and is dead. To expire is a process. It's more metaphysical than the word death. So it's saying they not only died in the flood, but it was excruciatingly painful and they were in a process of expiring during the flood. You can look at the dead body and say this body is dead now. But when did he? Two different things. Okay. So this word vagava to expire, you get the root of vagava, you get the word goi. to expire, you get the word goy. You know what goy is?
Nation.
Nations. 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 So, in the sight of God, the nations without God, in this standing before God, they expired. They're dead. This is where we get the concept that we are dead. We need to be born again. We need to be refilled and renewed in the Spirit of God. And God's Spirit should be able to come and not contend with us anymore, not be agitated with who we are. If we're still going to be the old self or the person, like what the Bible is saying, God's Holy Spirit is going to be agitated with our personality. We're going to go back to Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8, and during the times of the flood. These are the words which Jesus said, he says, just as it was in the days of the in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. What's he saying? What does he mean by this? It means that this world today is in the same place where the people were not willing to submit to the Spirit of God. And the presence of God, the Spirit of God will get agitated with your life and my life right now. Leave aside everything else. We will, we will, we will, not be entertaining enough to house the Spirit of God, to give us life, to regenerate us. Therefore, God made this decision a long time ago. But when all this was happening with humanity and the nations got the inheritance and their root is evil because they are corrupted in the image of God. So God has to put the nations away and say, I don't want to look at you anymore. I cannot look at you anymore. So God puts the providence of his divine nature, puts into place a plan to bring the nations back to him. But how does he do this? Therefore, he gave the nations the inheritance, but he said, I want now something for myself. So he separated a people through Avraham for himself. He separated a Goy Kadosh, a holy nation for himself. And he told that nation, you will be my priest and high priest on this earth. Through you, the world will be rectified. You have to be the light to the nations. The nations have to come to you to rectify you. That is the role of Israel. That is the role of what God is trying to do on this earth, my friends. Now, when I look at the level of impurity of the nations, we realize now when we started in chapter 9, and we realize when we started in chapter 9, verse 3, where are we? Chapter 9, verse 3. We started with this verse. Every moving thing that lives shall be yours for food. Like herbal greenery, I have given you everything. So he told the nations, he did not put any restriction on the nations. He said, eat anything that moves on 2 legs, 4 legs, 8 legs, 20 legs, 30 legs, flies, moves in the ocean, whatever it is you want to eat, you eat. Eat. No restriction. Absolutely no restriction. One thing, just remove the blood. Because the nefesh, the power of the nefesh is in the blood. And why do I have to remove the blood, the nefesh? It's because that nefesh is holding the midot of that animal that was killed. The blood has the DNA the midot, the natural instincts of that animal you are consuming. That means you are devouring and you're taking on that midot of that animal inside of you. Only the flesh is plain protein. There is no life in it. But the blood has got the midot, the nature of that animal. And by consuming that blood, we are devouring nature of animal after animal after animal after animal inside of us. You know what? You're strengthening that animal inside of you, as in the book of Genesis, that is going to now be strengthened to be contentious, to fight, to have greed, to have lust, and all these things. You know what? Your walk in this life, and if you ever think you're very spiritual, it's going to be very tough, because on one side you're praying and trying to be religious and spiritual, and the other side you are empowering your animal soul inside of you. Therefore, in the book of Acts, in the book of Acts, James, Yaakov, and the elders in Jerusalem decreed that for the nations who are coming in, for the Goyim who are joining themselves to the faith, it is enough for them for four things. One, stay away from blood. Stay away from blood. Two, do not eat anything that is strangled or cut or slaughtered in a wrong way. It has to follow the laws of kashrut. And he says that, wherever in the world there are synagogues, and this law of Moses has been taught all over the world. So the laws of kashrut are relevant for even the believers. Friends, listen to this. No blood and kashrut, laws of being kosher. Third thing, offering to idols. Fourth thing, stay away from sexual immorality. And then Yaakov says, y'all will do good. It's a good start for y'all. Once you'll purify your animal self and bring your animal self into subjection, then you will be able to give yourself as a korban khai, as a living sacrifice to the eternal Father. Otherwise, you're going to have a very tough time doing that. If you empower yourself, very tough time. So he told the nations, go eat what you want, but the blood. Don't have the blood. That's it. The flesh with the blood. Have the flesh, but remove the blood. I know a lot of people every Sunday morning after church go to the market. No, no, no. Don't touch it. Don't wash it. It has to go with the blood. The blood is the taste. Blood is, how can you remove the blood? It's the taste. I've learned the hard way. Please, friends, it's very, very difficult to make people understand biblical truths, what we're learning today. So, the entire story of Parashat Noach, Tower of Babel, as I said, it's a beautiful storyline. It's a beautiful Sunday school teaching. Fantastic. But something else is happening in the background. Something was telling me as he started this new year, friends, that this new year is about kelim, it's about vessels. My personal goal this year, my personal drive this year is I'm constantly asking the Lord is, Lord, tahor, holy vessel. I want to get rid of the impurities of my life. I've seen enough. I've gone through enough. I'm just fed up. I want this vessel, this vessel that I am in. I want this to be purified. Left tahor, my heart, my body, it has to be left tahor. This should be the theme this year 5782 for everybody. Until we do not cleanse ourselves and we cleanse and we rectify the image of God in our lives, that regeneration and the restitution coming back to God is going to be very, very difficult because it's not going to happen, friends. And when we look at Yeshua, when he was walking in this earth, he was walking in the perfect image and likeness of the Father. Perfect. Just how God wanted humanity to walk on this earth, he looked at Yeshua and said, my son in whom I'm well pleased. This is what I wanted humanity to be like. But we never done it. We failed. But when you look at Yeshua, the perfection of humanity, walking in the perfect image and likeness of God, I want to be like that. That's what it means to be Christ like. That's what it means to be in Salem and Demuth, the highest level of being the sons of God. As many as received him, it says in the Gospel of John, gave he the power to become sons and daughters of God. Think of all these things. Think of all these things, my friends. If we don't think of all these things, we're going to lose out the essence. We can read the Bible, we can read these stories, we can read all the wonderful stories that are in the Old Testament and say, "Oh, wonderful story! This is what happened to humanity. This is what God done, and he was what judgment upon the earth and this." And but we're missing the point completely. Completely missing the point. Everything is connected. Now you realize that chapter 6 is connected to chapter 7 and 8. Chapter 7 and 8 is connected to chapter 9. Parashat Noach is connected to Lech Lecha. These are not, individualistic stories that have no linking with it. Each story comes from a place of being linked with the previous events in the Torah. Everything is connected. These are not isolated stories. We tend to isolate, oh, the story of Avraham. Let's learn the story of Noah. Then let's learn the story of the Tower of Babel. Then let's learn the story of Adam and Eve or Cain and Abel. It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. They're all integrated, and one effect brings the effects of that into the other storyline. The rectification of that brings that into the other storyline. And now God has put this plan slowly, slowly, one by one. He's brought this plan into this world, and we see the nations now. Therefore, it was always the plan of God to rectify the nations. How he was going to do that is the story of Abraham. Now, in the divine will of God, in the divine will of God, when he seen what is happening in the world, a thought rose in God. A thought rose. And this thought was Avraham. That is why he says, Israel, my firstborn son. Why is God calling Israel my firstborn son? Because from a very different place in the heart of God, his divine will now, rose Israel from inside of him. And that Israel came out into physicality on this world, and God is never going to let Israel fall. He will send them into exile, he will break them, he'll bring them back, he will do everything possible with Israel. But that thought of Israel has risen from a very different place inside of God compared to the nations. Compared to the nations, friends. To hold Israel in that level of esteem, and when I'm saying Israel, I'm talking about the Israel of God, not what I see and hear and do. Okay? It's a different thing altogether. Because even Paul warns us of this. He says, all those who profess as Jews are not Jews. A Jew is somebody who is echad in his heart, who is circumcised in his heart. So we have to look at things in a very, very critical way. We have to understand what Israel is all about. Galatians 6:16, it says the Israel of God. Israel belongs to God. That Israel can be a Jewish person as well as somebody from the nations, grafted in into that one Israel of God. But considering that we have to understand the story, we have to understand the plan of God, we have to understand what has gone wrong, how the rectification started, how God separated the nations, what was the problem with the nations, the root of the cause of the problem with the nations, that they were abusing and they were they were not walking and corrupting the image of God in their lives, friends. And that is the problem, friends. That is exactly the problem. So I just wanted to share with you all with this parsha, and uh, I hope it's been a blessing to everybody, and I hope it's uh, brought some understanding, basic understanding to everything. Yeah. So yeah, I'll end the recording right now.